Hi, I'm Sebastian Page. This is Seb's Talks. Today I'm with Kobe Aboyaji. We're going to talk about his background, his research, and life at T. Rowe Price. So, Kobe, this is Seb's Talks, and we have these weird traditions to start those videos. First of all, we always start with a high five to relax a little bit.
Okay. How was that high five?
Well done.
Thank you.
We also do 200 push-ups. Kidding. Let's use some icebreaker questions. So, what's your favorite movie?
Shawshank Redemption.
Okay.
Have you seen it?
I have not, and this is going to sound weird because everybody's seen it and it's everybody's favorite movie, so I have not seen it. I'll watch it this weekend, I promise.
Okay.
Favorite band?
ABBA.
ABBA? Wow. Awesome. Yeah. And one thing I noticed earlier in my career, I worked on the East Coast, and a lot of it was about which university you went to. People would want to know, where did you go to school? That was sort of a typical Boston, Massachusetts question. Then I moved to the West Coast, to Newport Beach, and I realized the most common question was, what kind of car do you drive?
Oh, interesting.
So different cultures on the East and the West Coast.
Okay.
Let me ask you both. Tell us about your educational background, and then what kind of car do you drive?
Okay, so undergraduate. So my undergraduate, I started in South Africa, got a bachelor's degree in actuarial science, and I ended up ending it in Ghana. So I did 2 years in South Africa and finished it off in Ghana. The reason for that was that my father was working in South Africa. He got transferred back to Ghana, originally from Ghana, so then ended it in Ghana. So University of Cape Town in South Africa and University of Science and Technology in Ghana. And
was it in English? Or?
In English,
okay.
Both of them in English. There was the option at University of Cape Town to do Afrikaans, but most of my courses English or Afrikaans. I ended up doing the English track.
Got it.
And then in terms of graduate school, came to the United States in 2012 to do my master's and PhD joint program at Princeton University in operations research, which is just fancy for the math of decision making under uncertainty. And I think that covers it. And car I drive. Up until last week, I drove a Honda Civic.
Okay, what happened to it?
It gave up after 11 years. It finally died, and my wife really wanted us to get an SUV. After shopping around, we got the smallest SUV that BMW offers. It's the X1. Yeah. Super small. We love it. 1 week. Touch wood.
So you studied OR. This is interesting. I like how you describe it as sort of the science of decision making under uncertainty.
Yes.
You just made a decision to buy a new car under uncertainty. But tell us about how this clearly relates to investment management and money management, because that's what we do every day. We make decisions under uncertainty.
Yes.
But tell us how maybe your PhD thesis, what connections you find between what you study in your PhD program and what we do in money management.
Can I use PRM since there's more?
So PRM is
one tangible application of OR, my background in OR to my current work is in one product we're about to launch, PRM, Personalized Retirement Manager, which we can think of as target date strategies. So there are several components of my OR training. So with PRM, the problem we are trying to solve, the framework, to put it in an OR framework, or typically problems we solve in OR can be broken down in this 5-dimensional, 5-element framework. You usually have a state variable, which is what information do you know currently about the system, the problem you're trying to solve, right? So for retirement or personalized retirement manager, the problem you're trying to solve is that, say we take Sebastian. Sebastian is age X. Sebastian has this much
47.
in his Sebastian is age 47, dashing 47-year-old man. He has this much in his retirement account. He earns this much salary. And we know a bunch of things about him. We may
I won't reveal all these things.
You won't reveal all these things.
In case you want me you want to use me as a case study.
But assuming we know this about Sebastian, right? So then we're trying to make a decision on what's a good asset allocation mix for Sebastian, conditional on the fact that Sebastian plans to retire at some age in the future. Let's say typically they're 65. It may be different for you, but let's assume the default age of 65 and you plan to also start taking Social Security. So what we know about you would be the state variable. That's the first dimension, the first element, right? And then the second element of OR, or problems that can be solved in an operation research framework, is the decisions. What are the decisions, or what are the knobs that Sebastian can make, right? Market return is not a decision you make. That comes from outside. It's out of your power. But what decision can you make? You can make the decision on how much to save, right? So that's a decision. You can make the decision on, once you decide on how much to save, how much of that are you going to save in your asset allocation mix? Broadly speaking, there's in the framework of retirement income, there's typically how much are you going to save in risky asset versus say fixed income, right? So that's also a decision you can make. So there's the second element. The third element, typically with OR and such problems, is that you're working, uncertainty now comes in. You're working in an uncertain framework. There's the mathematical fancy way of saying that is stochasticity. You have stochasticity, there is randomness, right? So what are the random processes or variables? In this case, I've already mentioned one of them. You also mentioned one. There's market returns, which are random. In the future market returns are going to be random.
Or close enough to random.
Close enough to randomness. Well, for retirement, it's mostly random because it tends to be over many decades. In the short term, you may have some good predictive models, but again, retirements for most people tend to be 20, 30, 40 year process.
But you do know that the risk asset, the proportion you invest in stocks, is meaningful in terms of the expected return.
Yes,
right?
Yes,
so
you do have expectations.
There might be random movements in stock returns, but you can reasonably assume a positive equity risk.
Yes, correct. And that is true. Yes, so that is true that you do have, and usually we call that the parameters of your random process. The assumptions, the things you know about them, and then around those things you do know for a fact, there is some random noise about them. So that's the third dimension, the stochastic or random process. And then also the fourth dimension is that it would evolve over time. There is some notion of evolution in such problems, right? So you make a decision. So remember we started with the state variable. So we observe the state variable. What do we know about Sebastian? Sebastian made a decision, which is the second dimension, how much to invest in equity versus bonds. And after he made that decision, he observes some randomness, right? And then afterwards, now the system is going to change, right? I.e. the system is going to observe this market returns, or your salary is going to change by some unknown amount, right? Depending on bonus and whatnot. So you have all this randomness comes in. And once you take all these four things, you do, the fifth dimension is the objective function. What are you trying to optimize? There's usually some metric. At T. Rowe Price, our multi-asset research, lifecycle research team, which is my team, we have bespoke. I believe we are the only ones who do this. A pretty unique multi-attribute utility function, which takes into account. Before I mention why it's bespoke, typically if you go in standard economics literature, when they talk about utility function, usually it's utility of consumption. How much utility is Sebastian going to get from consuming this much this year, consuming that much over his lifetime? How much utility does he get?
So let me take a shot at defining utility, because I think it's critical to the optimization part of the process you're describing. To me, when I try to explain utility to a non-economist or a non-quantitative person, I'll describe it as what you're trying to achieve. It represents a goal, but more importantly, utility measures your happiness.
Yes.
In the context of these goals, how satisfied are you with the different outcomes? And the traditional example is that we all want high returns, but we also don't want too much volatility and too much risk. So that is a utility function in the classical sense.
Correct.
Very simplified. But that's what utility is. It's just trying to describe your goal and measure your level of happiness or satisfaction with how close you get to achieving those goals, or typically you might want to just maximize
it, right?
So sorry to interrupt, but I just sort of wanted to put in context what we mean when we say utility. It is so important in what we do in investment management.
Yes, no, certainly. Thank you for that. And in our problem, what goes into this utility function that you described is, in the classical economic sense, it's usually consumption. So you gain some satisfaction, as you said, or some happiness from consuming your asset, right? What's the key insight we add to this is that we also believe, and we are working with a professor, I don't know if I can say this, but we are working with a professor from Johns Hopkins who has pretty much signed off on this. We do believe that you can gain utility from holding wealth itself. So not just consuming, but even the fact of having wealth. People gain, we believe participants or people gain utility from having, so you open your retirement account and you see a nice round number sitting in there, you gain some utility from that, not from just consuming it down.
Yeah, and I think that's intuitive too, because people get an account balance and they like a higher than a lower balance, and they worry about depleting. If you're in retirement, you have a pot of money that you've accumulated. You're deeply worried about depleting that pot of money. And if you get your account balance and you see it going down or be volatile, that should be part of the utility function, what you're trying to achieve.
Yes, absolutely. Volatility, thank you for mentioning that. Volatility, the fact that not just having the balance, but the fact that it moves about. People gain, that affects the happiness, the satisfaction they're getting from it. So you may give someone an option of, you'd have a balance that 1 month could be 2 million, the next month could be 500,000, or have one that's, say, 1.5 million, but it's more smooth. And depending on the person's risk preferences, one may choose the first one or the second one. So these all things our utility function captures. That's the insight we had to capture all that in our utility function. And that's the fifth dimension to the OR, my OR background, and also how it's applied in a very tangible application of it in my day-to-day work.
So you studied operations research. How does it relate to what you do in money management? And what exactly did you learn in your PhD program in OR, or operations research?
Yes, so in OR, I'll give a tangible example that I've got the opportunity to work on while I'm here, which is Personalized Retirement Manager, PRM. And what we are trying to solve here is how much, at the very highest level, how much should participants who use PRM, how much should they invest in a risky asset versus bonds, so equity versus bonds. And in OR, usually when you have a problem like this, which we define as a stochastic optimization problem, it has a number of components. Right? There's a state variable, what do you know about the participants? There's a decision variable, what are the decisions they can make? What are the knobs they can change? There's a stochastic process. You can think of that as what are the knobs that they cannot change, but the universe can change, or God, if you believe in God, right? The randomness, how the market behaves, those are things that they cannot change. Typically, such problems evolves over time. So what is that evolution mechanism? How do their balance evolve based on the decisions they made and what the randomness that came into the system? And finally, another component that's very crucial is the objective function. What is that metric you're trying to optimize? Which for our model is a utility function. And the key insight to our model that's different from most of what you see in the standard economics literature is the fact that we believe our utility function believes that you don't get utility just from consumption, but you also gain utility from having wealth in of itself, right? When you get your bank, your retirement statement and you see that balance, you do gain some happiness, some satisfaction from that number. And you also gain some satisfaction for some people, depending on their risk appetite, from it not moving around too much. Or some people have very high risk appetite and they are willing to take on a lot more volatility so long as it grows. So our model is flexible enough to capture that.
Right, and of course, if you ask anybody about that problem, they'll say, well, I want very high income in retirement. I want it to last my entire lifetime. I want zero risk.
Yes.
And I want my balance to never be depleted and never
Yes.
move.
Yes.
And so the reality is that we have trade-offs.
Exactly.
And it's an optimization problem where your operations research background comes in. You need to define the utility or the satisfaction that you derive from moving some of these things in different directions.
Yes.
And it gets pretty complex because it's
It
a
does.
lifetime, multi-period problem.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
Exactly.
I've never done a PhD. I don't hold a PhD. So I'm curious, I'd love to hear what doing a PhD brought to you, not in terms of credential. We know it's an awesome credential you can have. You can teach others, you can go to industry. But in terms of life skills and lessons that you can apply at work and in life in general?
Yes. I would say the two main skills or life values I learned in my PhD. The first one is that, at least in the US, PhD programs tend to be very international. It tends to attract, as the nature of the US attracts the best and brightest from all over the world. So for me, it was a great opportunity to meet people of all different backgrounds. My dissertation group, the party, had someone from every continent except Antarctica.
Wow.
Again, it's the only place I can think of in my life, in my somewhat short, but with all these grades, I'm beginning to feel very long life now, where I've had someone being represented from every continent, right? And most of these people I form lifetime friendships with. I'm still in contact with them. So that's the first one, just that opportunity to meet people of so many different backgrounds and connect with them. The second one I would say is that PhD helped me build resilience, how to manage stress. For most people, definitely applies to me, but I'm pretty confident it applies to, I'll say, most people who do a PhD. It really is the first time that you'll be challenged academically, intellectually, right? Typically, people who pursue PhDs tend to be the type who generally were good in high school, generally were good in undergrad, at least top quartile of the class, right? And then you encourage your push to do a PhD. But it's the first time, and definitely true for me, where you are going to meet people who are just as bright, work just as hard, and sometimes smarter. It's the first time probably you question, wow, should I be here? The first time you hear about that dreaded imposter syndrome. And I think it's true for most people. PhD, some people do experience it in industry as well, but I would say for those of us who do a PhD, it's usually the first time you encounter that, and how you deal with it, how you manage that stress, that self-doubt, that emotional and mental grueling that comes from doing a PhD, right? I would say dealing with that and building resilience really helped me. The phrase I like to use is that I learned to suffer. PhD helped me to learn to suffer.
I'm not sure you'll encourage a lot of people to go get a PhD.
It's a good life skill though.
Yeah,
it's a good how to deal with it.
Yeah.
It's a good life lesson. It's something you use after the PhD in life. Some of the few ways I learned to deal with it, it's good to have hobbies outside that work, and that applies to work as well, right? Not just your thesis or dissertation, even in work. It's good to have hobbies outside that. It's good to this is so obvious, it's almost trite. Sleep well and eat well. Like these two, very easy. We call it I've forgotten the expression, the PhD 10 pounds. It's basically the first 6 months. If you're just going to put on 10 pounds and you won't realize where it came from. It's very easy to lose track of that when you're hyper focused on getting things done. So sleep well, eat well, have a hobby. And
did you play soccer through your PhD?
I played soccer, and it's great. Again, ties into the first point with international. Americans typically don't like soccer, but thankfully PhD is a lot of international students, right? So there are lots of other people who like soccer. So for me, it was soccer and playing the drums. I did drumming in high school, so there was a music room, so I'll go there and sometimes you just have to let.
Well, next video we'll have to ask you to do a drum solo. I can't play any instrument to save my life, so we'll see if we can.
Drum is very easy.
We'll see if we can put a band together. So tell me how you feel about this. coming from a very technical, well-defined math PhD program to the messy world of how people behave and how markets can change. And how has this transition been for you?
It's been challenging, but also I've had very good people to learn from. A lot of our collaborators, it tends to be people who are closer to the product and the market, and also our clients. Like we get to work closely with them. That's one of the benefits of being here. I have colleagues who work elsewhere in research. Usually you're given a computer.
Not enough mentorship. Right?
Not enough mentorship, but also not enough collaboration, direct collaboration with the people who actually saw the product. The fact that I'm in research and I have access to the head of target date, right? It's almost mind-blowing, right? It's part of the tier of price culture, the fact that there isn't, it's not as hierarchical as other places. I have colleagues, I won't mention names, but I have colleagues who work in other asset management places where it's not as easy. I can easily go and have a conversation with him, or he stops by and have a conversation with me, and then we share ideas, or the head of RPS, or someone who works in products. So the fact that I get to talk to these different people gives me a different perspective. And
there's a famous, it's great to hear. There's a famous Steve Jobs quote, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher it. He said something like, "We don't hire smart people to tell them what to do. We hire smart people to tell us what to do." Or something like that. I must have butchered the quote completely. We'll look it up. But that's kind of what you're expressing here, is that the head of target date really wants to hear from you because you have the expertise and you're really uncovering insights from really awesome data that we have that has never really been mined for insights before. And you're building an important product for the firm. On the question of moving from pure science and the PhD program to the quote-unquote messy world of investing, I can see two types of reactions, and I think I've seen both reactions. Some people with a hard science background, when they move to finance, they will get a bit turned off because they'll think, I can't replicate my experiment. I'm a really smart person and my model is correct, but it's not working because markets have changed, and that's incredibly frustrating to them. And I've seen people actually go back to hard science. I see others who are thinking, this is even more of an intellectual challenge. Because while I can have a well-defined chess game, well-defined mathematical problem to solve, which can be incredibly hard. I'm not dissing on hard science, but it's just a different challenge. The whole human psychology, human behavior, the fact that financial markets change. It seems to me that you've had the latter kind of reaction. Like, okay, I know a lot of math, but here's an opportunity to deal with uncertainty in the true sense of the term.
Yes. And also, there is, I don't know if there's another dimension. You can have these two, but also what's the end goal? The thing is, ultimately, what we do, I genuinely believe this. I'm not just saying that because I work here, but I genuinely believe what we do matters.
Right.
My mother-in-law she's a retired teacher. She calls me maybe once a week to ask some retirement-related question. And whenever she calls, it makes me think there are millions of people like that all over the country, right? She doesn't know the difference between equity and bonds. No offense to her. She knows things I don't know, but that's not her. The fact that she can sleep safely at night because there are people like us and other asset management, but specifically those of us working in retirement who can take care of that for her so that she can have a peaceful night of sleep. I think that really matters. So whether it's theoretical or it's messy, so long as I know, and not to be condescending, I know with me and the people I work with, we can solve the problem better than say my mother-in-law could have on her own. That gives me some level of comfort.
And it's not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but we as a firm have direct relationships with plan participant, people that invest in a defined contribution plan in the US. or individual investors directly, over 3 million.
Millions.
So it really matters. Let's shift a little bit. Is there anything else you wanted to say about the culture?
T. Rowe Price culture it's amazing. I've worked elsewhere. I believe among at least people of around my level, typically most of them have only been here, so sometimes it's hard to get
benchmark.
There's no benchmark. I worked elsewhere before. Between PhD and T. Rowe Price, I worked at another company, and when you come from elsewhere, you really see that T. Rowe Price culture. People talk about it. It's such a vague term, but really, if you've worked elsewhere, and you get to appreciate it more, I believe. People here are nice. People are just nicer to work with, right? Because it's a pretty stressful industry.
It's hard.
Like finance is hard, and sometimes it gets stressful, but you don't notice it here as much. Again, because of my background, I would say in my department, maybe half went into pure academia to become professors and tenure track. The other half went into industry, mostly finance. So I have friends in other places, and sometimes, I'll give a tangible example. We have a chat where people share what they grow. Like literally all that people share on this chat, it's a work chat. People share what they grow, what meats or vegetables they grow over the weekend.
They take pictures?
They take pictures, they share it. Hey, this weekend I grow this, or I'm trying to. Recently, someone ordered like a ton of coal. I won't mention any names, but things like that. I tell my friends, and it blows their mind. Like one of them looks at me like I have 3 eyes. Because in his world, is you check in, he doesn't even know how many kids his manager has, because they don't have that. It's, that finance, when you think of finance, it's
we're all human beings, and we work together for so many hours. And I think building trust between people is really important, because it's great to hear you say people are nice and you have a nice culture. That can also have its downsides if we get paralyzed by trying to get consensus all the time.
That is true.
And we are not prepared to disagree with each other, because I don't know if you agree, but I think the best way to innovate is to get people, really smart people in the room, and allow them to freely disagree and mix the ideas together and collapse and confront the ideas. And that's where you get true innovation, because your intellect gets really in hyperdrive.
Right.
But in order to do that and not be miserable coming home, you have to learn to trust your colleagues and trust that your idea is not you.
Yes.
And, whatever way you can build trust by seeing others as humans, by sharing grilling ideas and photos and knowing them on a personal basis, I think it really matters.
I agree. What you said is true. What I'll say though is that it's a spectrum, and it's really hard to, you mentioned it, to disentangle, is this person challenging my idea or me, right? We tend to attach our value to our ideas, right? So this person challenging PRM, hyper criticizing PRM. Sure, I can think about it, detach myself, think about it, and see the value, the gold nugget in there. Human nature comes in again, right?
Look, I get it. It's easier said than done. It sounds great. Right. You can read an Adam Grant book, and Think Again is a great book, by the way, where he says you need to be very clinical about your ideas. And he flips the script completely, and he says, if someone disagrees with you, your reflex should not be fight or flight, or should not be to feel personally attacked. It should be to be excited and curious that you might learn something. Okay, that all sounds awesome on paper. It's human nature that if you've worked for a couple 100 hours and you go to a meeting and you present your research finding and someone completely disagrees with them, it's going to be pretty hard.
It's going to be hard.
Right? But I do think that the trust element is important, and the respect.
Yes. Which is, T. Rowe Price has that in abundance, the trust and not a lot of sharp elbows. That's a phrase I hear a lot. In finance, you hear that, right? In fact, I'll give an example. Most times when I meet someone new who knows me that I don't know, almost always it's my peer who's either Louise or Berg or Adam. It's like, oh, Kobe knows this. He can talk more about it. So they trust me enough and they don't see me as competition in a way.
Right.
It's very common in finance. We tend to be common in finance, whereas it's a zero-sum game, right? If I lift up Louisa, that means I have to minimize myself. Whereas that's not the culture at Europrise.
Right.
It's a culture of collaboration, and I can lift up Louisa, and it lifts both of us up.
That's awesome. And you know what we have at Europrise that's really special? We have our own socks.
True. I don't have one. I should.
I'll get you a pair. I'm wearing, for the record, the new. Here you have our trustee logo. This is the new pair. Very hard to get. You really have to earn it.
I look forward
you have
to it.
earned it. You will get a pair. There's a
Thank
pair
you.
coming your way.
Thank you.
Anything else you'd like to talk about, either in terms of the research or the culture or any other topic?
So with my background in actuarial science, how it fits in here, even though that was my undergraduate study, I didn't really do actuarial science in my graduate school. But because, as I mentioned, retirement, the journey, that life cycle journey, it tends to last decades for most people. You start working at 25, you're going to retire at 65. And then at Europrise, we believe in not just taking you to retirement, but through retirement. If you speak to our target date folks, they talk a lot about through. So our glide path and also our consumption solution, our income solutions, you're through retirement, right? So we take you from your accumulation phase through the decumulation phase. These tend to be over decades. One factor of just being a human is that mortality, right? So all our models incorporate some notion of mortality. We have to capture the mortality rate. And that's one area of research I also tend to work on a lot.
Or longevity. Does longevity sound better than
longevity?
Mortality?
Yes, I was thinking.
It's
yes,
the same
true.
thing.
Longevity. No, that's true. That's true. It sounds true.
We all die.
It's
one
more
day.
appealing.
We can get very philosophical and talk about stoicism and the fact that we all die and we should all embrace
And sometimes
it.
it's not even death. It's yes, longevity is good, but it's also another expression actuaries use is I'm blanking out now. The fact that you can become disabled.
Right.
It's not just death, but your ability
incapacity.
There is an actual term that I'm forgetting. Sorry. Apologies.
But basically, you can't work it.
You can't work anymore. Right. So we have to capture that notion that there is uncertainty, not just in the variability, but also uncertainty that comes from the fact that you may not be able to earn income anymore. You may have to tap into that retirement pot that you're working on, you're
right.
accumulating on earlier than typical. So with my background in actuarial science, I can use some of those things I learned in undergraduate, my survival analysis and mortality analysis to incorporate that into the models we built. More recently, I built with Berg, one of my other colleagues, 2 years ago with COVID. He got data on COVID. Berg, phenomenal researcher. He probably knows more about COVID than anyone I know. He has so much data on COVID. So between the two of us, we updated our mortality table to capture the medium and long-term effects of COVID on the US. And we plan to do that for Canada and Japan as well, the two other markets that, at least in the life cycle research team, we are considering. I'll say this.
Yeah, when you look at solving this lifetime investing model, by the way, Bill Sharpe, who won a Nobel Prize, said it's the thorniest, hardest problem to solve in finance.
Yes.
So I don't know how that makes you feel that you're working on the hardest problem of all of finance. You're doing a great job at it.
Thank you.
But it's a tough problem.
Yes.
And you talked about people's behavior is hard to predict, or even if you advise, hard to control. Markets are unpredictable, and it's a multi-period problem.
Yes.
What you do in one period will change the outcome in the following period.
And it propagates through time.
Yeah, so sometimes you need to work backwards. Right? And that's very complex if you have probabilities in there.
Yes.
But it's remarkable how many components there are to this.
Absolutely.
I call it a lab, to this life cycle lab, where we have with your background in actuarial science, you model longevity risk, and then there's salary models of how people earn and population level salary models, and a simulator of capital markets, and we talked about a utility function. So it's a very big lab and a big infrastructure we've built. Let me ask you, we're going next? Have we solved it, or are there other problems that we'll keep refining and improving over time?
I think we've solved a significant aspect of it, which is personalization, if I may talk a little bit about it. So with the retirement problem I've been talking about here, if we are at a 50,000 view, right? So typically you have a pooled population. It's usually a plan, or usually a company's plan or a state's plan, some kind of entity, but it's pooled. And then you have a glide path, which typically, as I said, so you have this pot of piggy bank or a pot of gold that you're saving for, and you have to invest it, usually in some asset allocation mix. Now, how, in theory, that mix is going to change over the lifetime of participants, how it changes over time is called a glide path. Usually static in the industry. The first level, the 50,000 view is that it's static, i.e. you have this line, if you can picture this. So you have a line that starts high, when you're younger, you can take more risk. So how much risky asset you can invest in is higher. And then as you get closer to retirement, you de-risk, you take on less risk. So it's a line that starts high and then comes down.
So you're younger than me. I'm gonna guess, I'm not gonna ask, but as someone who's earlier in their career, you would have a higher allocation to stocks relative to bonds. As you approach retirement, you tend to buy more bonds.
Correct. That is correct. Yes. And that path you're on is called the glide path, if you can picture it. And at the highest level, it's usually static. Static in the sense that once you're on that glide path, you stay on it, right? So, and that's what us and our competitors usually sell. Those are the first, you can think of that as the first iteration of glide paths. The next iteration was you take the same pool of participants and you say, well, for this pool, or even within the same pool, there may be sub-cohorts. A tangible example is the states that we are currently working on. They have three main sub-cohorts. So you have teachers, it's a state, so you have teachers, you have what they call first responders, which is police and fire service, and they have miscellaneous, which is everyone else. Clearly, the mortality experience of a teacher would be different from a police or a fire service, right? So talking about, say, mortality tables or longevity risk, you have to build a different model for them, adjust for these three cohorts. So this process of adjusting and coming up with different glide paths for these different cohorts, or even just the one cohort, that was the next evolution of glide paths. So you went from static to customized. So the static one, which is maybe the population, now you have customized. A natural extension that probably comes to you or anyone listening to this would be, well, if you can customize at a sub-cohort level, then the next level would be to customize at the personalized, the individual level. And that's a very hard problem, as Bill Sharp mentioned. And it's a problem we've solved, and I kind of hinted at it early on, Personalized Retirement Manager, PRM. The next level will be to enhance that. So we've built, say, version 1 of it. Over the coming years, we plan to enhance that to incorporate other state variables. Currently, we do not, one key financial decisions most people make is mortgage. How much mortgage to take on. That's something we currently don't incorporate in PRM as it is, but it's something it's a big one, right? Yeah. For most people, that's probably their biggest liability.
Right. And
to incorporate that into the PRM. So incorporating things like that into PRM. So they are clearly, even though we've made a huge strides in that area, there's still more we can add. So I'll say more to be done.
You know, LinkedIn is a job site fundamentally. So I was wondering if you could give people some career advice, especially if they're early in their careers, you have a few years under your belt. What career advice would you give? And let's focus on our business, investment management.
Investment management, I'll say ask a lot of questions. It's better to ask a lot of questions and do a good project, excellent project, than to not ask questions because of how you may perceive people would perceive you and say, do substandard or mediocre.
It's amazing how important that is and how newcomers sometimes are reluctant to ask questions.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with asking questions.
It's absolutely.
I embarrass myself often with really dumb questions, but you know what? I learn something every day.
Exactly. It's and again, it's easier said than done, right? When you're new, you've built,
Right.
I would say you've built enough social capital and credibility that you can ask any question, right? Whereas when you're new, you're still trying to build that. So it's
Right.
easy, but I would say, really, it's an important skill. Ask questions. And most times, honestly, what I've realized is most times, there's almost always someone else in the room who wanted to answer a question but didn't have didn't feel comfortable asking it.
Right.
So it's good to ask questions. The second advice I would give, and it's probably also a life advice, I would say just be a nice person to work with. Just be nice. It doesn't take much to be nice. Of all the things, right, you can be, it doesn't take much to be nice. And I like this Maya Angelou quote that says, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And looking at my own life, when I think back, there are teachers or people I met in middle school. I still remember, I like that person. I like how nice they were. And sometimes I don't even remember what that person taught me. I don't remember. So I would say,
It sounds simple, but we're, especially if you're starting, so focused on goals. And sometimes you look at other people and you think, maybe they stand between me and my goals.
yes,
And you kind of forget. It's just wonderful, simple advice. Life will be easier. You will be over time more successful
yes,
if you go out of your way to be nice. Look, we all have bad days,
yes.
but I think it's great advice. Ask questions, be nice to people. Anything else?
And those two.
All right. Well done.
Thank you.